The thing about galactic invasions is that they're supposed to follow a script. Step 1. Arrive with overwhelming force. Step 2. Demonstrate said overwhelming force on a minor population center. Step 3. Accept the inevitable surrender. Step 4. Add another star system to your ever-growing empire, and move on to the next conquest, like you're collecting trading cards. The Vel'kanth Collective had this routine down to a science. They'd been doing it for 3 centuries, steamrolling through the outer spiral arms with the casual efficiency of a particularly motivated homeowners association. They were a hive-mind species, which meant they thought in perfect unison, strategized with zero disagreement, and generally operated like the universe's most terrifying committee, where everyone actually agreed on everything. 17 species had folded within weeks of the Vel'kanth showing up in orbit. The Thrawn held out for a month before deciding that pride wasn't worth being atomized. Even the notoriously stubborn Arrak's Confederacy took one look at the Vel'kanth warfleet and essentially said, "You know what? Never mind," before signing surrender documents so fast they nearly tore the paper. Then the Collective made the mistake of showing up at Earth. It started normally enough. The Vel'kanth arrived in the Sol system with 300 warships, each the size of a small city, bristling with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust like an eggshell. They broadcast their standard message: surrender or be destroyed. Humanity had 72 hours to comply. Humanity's response arrived in 64 hours. It was not a white flag. It was a nuclear warhead, retrofitted with a faster-than-light jump drive, delivered directly into the bridge of the Vel'kanth flagship. The explosion could be seen from Mars. The Vel'kanth Collective, using the shared processing power of approximately 4 billion connected minds, came to a unanimous conclusion. These humans were absolutely insane. They weren't wrong. What followed was 6 months of the kind of warfare that made the Vel'kanth's previous conquests look like polite disagreements. Humans didn't fight like any species the Collective had encountered. They didn't form orderly battle lines. They didn't surrender when mathematically outmatched. They certainly didn't follow any predictable tactical doctrine. Instead, they did things like strap explosives to asteroids and play billiards with them. They hacked Vel'kanth communications, broadcast Earth's most annoying pop music on loop until 3 entire ship crews went temporarily catatonic from sensory overload. One human pilot, moments from being captured, ejected from his disabled fighter and gave the boarding party the finger before detonating his own ship's reactor, taking half the Vel'kanth cruiser with him. The Collective's war analysts were baffled. Their psychological profiles were useless. Their probability matrices kept returning error messages. How did you conquer a species that treated warfare like an extremely lethal improvisation exercise? But bafflement aside, the Vel'kanth were still winning. Slowly, expensively, and with far more casualties than anticipated, but winning nonetheless. Earth's colonies fell one by one. The orbital defense platforms were reduced to debris. The human fleet, for all its creative chaos, was being ground down by simple mathematics. The Collective had more ships, more soldiers, more resources. Humanity was running out of everything except stubbornness. That's when the whispers started on the Vel'kanth command channels, reports of a new kind of attack. Not fleet actions or orbital bombardments, but something else, something surgical, something that didn't follow the normal patterns of human warfare. A supply depot on Europa went dark. 2,000 Vel'kanth personnel gone, no distress signal, no sign of struggle, just silence. A command center on Titan reported an intruder, then stopped reporting entirely. When reinforcements arrived, they found the entire facility's staff dead, and every computer system wiped clean. The security footage showed nothing but static, except for one frame. A single frame showing a human figure, standing in the command center's heart, head tilted slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. An entire battalion disappeared while conducting a sweep of the lunar surface, vanished. 3,000 soldiers with the most advanced armor and weapons the Collective could provide, and they simply stopped responding. Search parties found them 3 days later, their equipment intact, their bodies arranged in perfect geometric patterns across the crater floor, every single one eliminated with ruthless precision. The Vel'kanth Collective had encountered special operations forces before. Most species had them. Elite soldiers, highly trained, capable of inflicting damage disproportionate to their numbers. The collective had procedures for dealing with such threats, containment protocols, countermeasures. Those procedures assumed that special operations forces operated in teams, that they had limits, that they were ultimately just soldiers with better training. The human brass had a different philosophy. When your enemy outnumbers you 1,000 to 1, when every conventional battle is a mathematical guarantee of loss, when your back is against the wall and extinction is one bad week away, you don't send a team, you send an apocalypse with a pulse. The project had a designation in the military files, Protocol Omega. The scientists who developed it called it the Thanatos Initiative. The generals who authorized it simply called it necessary, but the woman who volunteered for it, who endured 18 months of augmentation and conditioning and transformation into something that existed in the blurry space between human and weapon, she didn't call it anything at all. She didn't need to. Her actions would speak louder than any designation ever could. The Vel'kanth intercepted human military communications discussing her deployment. The translations were imperfect, filtered through the collective's understanding of human language and metaphor, but one word kept appearing in the chatter, spoken with a mixture of awe and fear, that the hive-mind found distinctly unsettling. Death. They called her death. The collective's strategic minds analyzed this, clearly a psychological warfare tactic, an attempt to demoralize through mythology. Humans were known for such things. The collective would not fall for primitive intimidation. Then 3 more facilities went dark, in a single night. Then 7, then 15, and the Vel'kanth Collective, united consciousness of billions, began to understand that death was not a metaphor. She was a deployment. The Vel'kanth had sensors that could detect a ship dropping out of faster-than-light travel from 3 star systems away. They had thermal imaging that could spot a rabbit's heat signature through 6 feet of solid rock. They had quantum displacement detectors that could identify dimensional fluctuations caused by a single atom moving through space-time. None of it mattered. She moved through their installations like smoke through a chain-link fence. The collective's defense networks built on the combined processing power of a hive mind that never slept and never disagreed, kept finding her 3 seconds after she'd already left. Their predictive algorithms, which had successfully anticipated every human fleet movement for 6 months, consistently placed her exactly where she wasn't. The Vel'kanth High Command assembled in their primary war coordination nexus, a massive orbital station above what used to be called Ganymede. 47 of the collective's finest strategic minds, linked in perfect synchronization, analyzed the problem. Commander Vel'kanth, speaking for the unified consciousness, addressed the gathered intelligence. The target exhibits capabilities beyond standard human augmentation. Analysis suggests multiple enhancement vectors. What Vel'kanth's diplomatic phrasing meant was that the woman-designated death had been rebuilt from the ground up. The human military had taken one of their best and decided that merely excellent wasn't going to cut. They'd enhanced her reflexes until she could dodge incoming fire by reading the firing solution before the trigger was pulled. They'd augmented her perception until she experienced time like a movie she could pause and rewind. They'd wired her nervous system with enough technology to run a small city, then taught her to use all of it simultaneously while maintaining perfect human intuition. The result was something that thought like a human but moved like a ghost, and hit like a tactical warhead. Her training records, fragments of which the collective had managed to intercept, were genuinely disturbing. Not because of what they showed, but because of what they implied. 18 months in a facility that didn't officially exist, working with instructors whose personnel files were classified above top secret. The reports mentioned things like dimensional awareness training, and quantum state combat applications and psychological warfare integration. The collective's analysts couldn't quite parse what half of those phrases meant. The humans had apparently invented entirely new fields of military science just to prepare one soldier for deployment. One file fragment particularly troubled the Vel'kanth. A note from her final evaluation. Candidate demonstrates concerning level of effectiveness. Psychological review suggests complete mission integration. Recommend careful monitoring of post-deployment mental state. If deployment exceeds 6 months, immediate extraction and rehabilitation. The date on that evaluation was 9 months ago. The collective decided this was probably not reassuring. Her combat style was equally baffling. She didn't fight like a soldier, She fought like a force of nature that had taken tactical courses. The Vel'kanth studied footage from the few security systems that managed to catch glimpses of her in action. One clip showed her entering a command center through a ventilation shaft. 3 guards turned to respond. She was already past them, moving with fluid grace that made the laws of physics seem like suggestions rather than rules. By the time they'd processed her presence, she'd eliminated the command staff, corrupted the facility's entire database, and planted enough explosives to level the building. The whole operation took 90 seconds. Another clip, recovered from a helmet camera on a dead Vel'kanth soldier, showed something even more unsettling. The soldier's unit had been hunting her through the ruins of a human settlement. They had her cornered, or so they thought. 40 soldiers, full combat gear, thermal imaging active. She stepped out of the shadows like she was arriving fashionably late to a party she hadn't been invited to. The footage lasted 6 seconds. She moved through the unit like water, finding cracks in concrete, each motion economical and precise. The soldier wearing the camera managed to fire exactly 1 shot before she was behind him. The last frame showed her face, partially obscured by tactical gear, head tilted slightly as if listening to distant music. Then the feed cut to black. Command reviewed the footage 83 times, searching for the trick, the angle, the explanation. They found none. She simply shouldn't have been able to move that fast, react that perfectly, eliminate that many targets in that little time. But the rumors started spreading through the Vel'kanth ranks like a virus, which was ironic considering they were a hive mind that shared all information instantaneously. But this was different. This wasn't data. This was fear. And fear had a way of propagating even through unified consciousness. Soldiers started reporting shadows that moved wrong, sounds that shouldn't exist, the feeling of being watched by something that was dissecting their every movement, learning their patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The collective's psychological specialists declared it mass hysteria, which was rich coming from a species that literally shared one brain. Then she hit the main supply nexus at Callisto. The facility was the collective's primary logistics hub for the entire Sol system. It was defended by 3 battalions, an orbital defense grid, and enough automated weapons to hold off a small army. The Vel'kanth had considered it impregnable, which should have been their first clue that something was about to go catastrophically wrong. She infiltrated during a shift change, exploiting a 7-second gap in the sensor coverage that shouldn't have existed because the systems were supposed to have 0 gaps. She moved through 2 kilometers of reinforced corridors without triggering a single alarm. By the time the collective realized something was happening, she'd already reached the central control nexus. What happened next entered Vel'kanth legend. The kind of story that got shared in hushed tones despite being a hive mind that didn't technically do hushed tone. She didn't destroy the facility. That would have been too simple. Instead, she reprogrammed it. Every supply shipment that left Callisto for the next week went to the wrong location. Ammunition got sent to medical facilities. Food supplies ended up in weapons dip. One particularly creative rerouting sent a shipment of highly volatile plasma cores to a command center, where the collective's high command was having a strategy meeting. The evacuation was undignified. The high command did not appreciate, but the real message came in the form of a video file she left in the system's core, set to broadcast on every screen in the facility simultaneously. It showed her standing in the control room, surrounded by the unconscious bodies of the command staff. She looked directly at the camera, made gestures that the collective's translators struggled to interpret, but eventually settled on as an expression of casual dismissal, and then walked out the front entrance while every alarm in the facility screamed uselessly. The footage included a timestamp. She'd been in the facility for 47 minutes. Nobody had even known she was there until she'd already left. The Vel'kanth Collective, unified consciousness of 4 billion minds with 3 centuries of conquest experience, came to another unanimous conclusion. They needed to kill her immediately. The question was how.
The Vel'kanth Collective did what any reasonable galactic superpower would do when faced with an existential threat wrapped in human skin. They threw everything at the problem except common sense and humility. Operation Absolute Termination launched with the kind of military precision that only a hive mind could achieve. Every available resource in the Sol system was redirected toward a single objective: locate and eliminate the target.
the Collective pulled troops from active invasion fronts. They reassigned their best tactical units. They deployed experimental technology that was still technically in beta testing, which should have been a warning sign that maybe they were panicking just a little bit. The hunter-killer teams were the Collective's finest. Each unit consisted of 50 soldiers, enhanced with the best augmentation technology the Vel'kanth could offer. They moved in perfect coordination, thought in unified purpose, and communicated instantaneously through their neural link. They were, on paper, the perfect counter to a single operative, no matter how skilled. The first team lasted 3 hours after deployment before their tracking signals went dark. The second team made it to 4 hours, which the Collective considered progress until they realized the extra hour was because she'd been toying with them, leading them in circles through an abandoned mining complex before eliminating them all in a supply closet. The strategic humiliation was apparently intentional. Team 3 through 7 didn't even get to report contact before their life signs flatlined. The Collective's tactical analysts pulled their metaphorical hair out, which was difficult considering they didn't have hair or individual identities. The problem was simple: she was learning faster than they could adapt. Every tactic they deployed, she counted. Every trap they set, she avoided or turned against them. It was like playing chess against someone who could see the next 50 moves, and had also set your chessboard on fire just to make things interesting. Then she escalated, because apparently the Collective hadn't been humiliated enough. The Vel'kanth had been using Earth's own satellite network against the human resistance, hijacking communications and using the planet's infrastructure for surveillance. It was elegant, efficient, and exactly the kind of tactical advantage that wins war. She took the entire network over in a single night, locked the Collective out with encryption they couldn't crack, and proceeded to use their own surveillance systems to hunt their forces. The irony was not lost on the Collective. The irony was, in fact, beating them repeatedly over the head. For 3 weeks, Vel'kanth units found themselves ambushed by someone who knew exactly where they'd be before they got there. Supply convoys vanished. Patrol units disappeared. One particularly unfortunate battalion was lured into a canyon where she'd rigged the entire cliff face with human mining charges and Vel'kanth plasma cores. The explosion was visible from orbit, and got added to Earth's growing highlight reel of humans doing absolutely unhinged things to invaders. But the satellite takeover was just the opening act. She used the access to crack into the Collective's tactical network, which should have been impossible because the network operated on quantum-encrypted hive-mind technology that didn't interface with individual consciousness. Somehow she found a backdoor that the Collective's own programmers didn't know existed, which raised uncomfortable questions about how well the Vel'kanth actually understood their own technology. Once inside, she didn't destroy anything. That would have been merciful. Instead, she introduced what human programmers called a logic bomb, and what the Collective's technicians called a digital nightmare that made them question their career choices. The virus was elegant in its cruelty. It didn't damage systems, it just introduced tiny delays into the Collective's unified consciousness. A 3-second lag between thought and action, just enough to make the hive mind feel like it was thinking through molasses. For a species that prided itself on instant perfect coordination, the experience was somewhere between torture and existential horror. The Collective purged the virus after 6 hours of system-wide panic, but the psychological damage was done. Vel'kanth soldiers started hesitating, second-guessing, operating with individual caution instead of unified certainty. She'd weaponized their greatest strength and turned it into a liability. The Collective's high command decided enough was enough. They authorized the deployment of the Omega Protocol, which was essentially the Vel'kanth equivalent of forget strategy. Just kill everything in a 5-mile radius and sort out the details later. They identified her last known location, a derelict space station orbiting Europa, and sent everything they had: 15 warships, 10,000 troops, enough firepower to glass a small moon. She wasn't at the location. Obvious. The intelligence had been planted, the bait obvious enough that anyone with basic tactical training should have seen it. But the Collective was frustrated, angry, and operating with the strategic clarity of a stressed college student during finals week. What she was actually doing while the Vel'kanth were busy bombing empty space was infiltrating their primary command vessel, the Nexus Prime. The ship was a floating city, home to 20,000 crew members and the entire strategic brain of the Sol system invasion. It was supposed to be impregnable, defended by every security measure the Collective could imagine.
She walked in through a cargo airlock during a routine resupply, hidden inside a shipping container that the Collective's own logistics network had delivered. Sometimes the best infiltration technique was just letting the enemy carry you exactly where you wanted to go. Once inside, she moved through the ship like a predator in tall grass. Silent, patient, economic. The Nexus Prime had internal sensors that could detect a mouse breathing in the cargo bay. She bypassed them by moving through spaces the Collective hadn't considered. Maintenance shafts too small for Vel'kanth soldiers. Ventilation systems with gaps in coverage. Even the spaces between the hull's double walls where she could remain undetected for hours. She spent 2 days inside the ship, mapping their command structure, identifying critical systems, learning the rhythms of their operations. The Collective had no idea she was there, which was impressive considering 20,000 connected minds were actively looking for her. On the 3rd day she made her move. During a routine command briefing, with the entire leadership hierarchy present in the central strategic chamber, she dropped through a ceiling panel like the universe's most unwelcome surprise party. The Vel'kanth High Command had approximately 3 seconds to process that Death herself had just crashed their meeting before she activated the device she'd spent 2 days planting throughout the ship. EMP charges, 37 of them, positioned at every critical system node. When they detonated simultaneously, the Nexus Prime went from fully operational warship to very expensive floating paperweight in under 5 seconds. Life support stayed active. She wasn't a monster, but communications, weapons, propulsion and every tactical system went dark. 20,000 Vel'kanth soldiers suddenly found themselves trapped on a dead ship, with the one human they'd been desperately trying to kill for 6 months. She walked out of the strategic chamber, past the paralyzed High Command, and left a single message displayed on every functional screen in the ship. You should have stayed home. Then she stole an escape pod and left, because sometimes the best victory was the one where you walked away while your enemies contemplated their life choices in the dark. The Vel'kanth Collective had conquered 17 species, crushed 42 rebellions, and established dominance across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. They had never, in 3 centuries of expansion, experienced what humans casually referred to as having a very bad day. They were experiencing it now. The Nexus Prime drifted in orbit like a monument to tactical hubris, powerless and humiliated. The High Command sat in the dark, connected minds buzzing with the kind of panicked deliberation that came from realizing you'd fundamentally misunderstood the assignment. They'd thought they were fighting a soldier, an enhanced one, certainly, dangerous, absolute, but still just one person with limits and vulnerabilities. They'd been wrong. What they were fighting was an idea wrapped in flesh and armed with humanity's collective spite. The Collective made one final decision, reached with the desperate unanimity of a species that had run out of good options and was now shopping in the clearance bin of terrible ones. They would commit everything to one decisive strike. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon system they had left in the Sol system. They would obliterate Earth's remaining defensive positions, end the human resistance, and deal with the death problem by removing her entire species from the equation. Genocide wasn't the Collective's preferred solution. It was messy, generated terrible publicity across the galactic community, and really messed up the conquered planet's real estate value. But pride was expensive, and the Vel'kanth had been paying in installments of humiliation for 6 months. The Armada assembled above Earth's moon, 300 ships forming a wall of steel and spite. The Collective's new Supreme Commander, freshly promoted after the previous one had resigned in disgrace from the Nexus Prime incident, broadcast the final ultimatum. Humanity had 12 hours to surrender unconditionally, or the planet would be reduced to radioactive debris. Humanity's response arrived in 11 hours. It was not a surrender. It was her. She didn't arrive in a ship. She arrived in an experimental human fighter craft that was 50% cutting-edge technology and 50% duct tape and prayers, screaming through the Vel'kanth formation at speeds that made physics professors weep. The fighter was broadcasting on every frequency, pumping out enough electromagnetic noise to blind half the Collective's sensors and give the other half a migraine. The broadcast wasn't even tactical. It was Earth's most aggressively defiant rock music, cranked to volumes that violated several interstellar noise ordinance laws. The Vel'kanth opened fire with enough weapons to vaporize a small asteroid. She dodged through the barrage like she was dancing, which technically she was, if dancing involved making 300 warships look like they were being piloted by confused teenagers learning to parallel park. Then she did something that made the collective's tactical analysts question their entire understanding of warfare. She headed straight for the command carrier at the formation center, broadcasting a new signal. It was a virus, not the digital kind, the biological kind. The Vel'kanth were a hive mind, every individual connected through quantum neural links that allowed instant communication across their entire species. It was their greatest advantage, the foundation of their military superiority. It was also, as the collective was about to discover, a single point of catastrophic failure. The virus didn't attack Vel'kanth biology, it attacked their connection. The human scientists who designed it, working from fragments of captured Vel'kanth technology and several months of increasingly unethical experimentation, had created something beautifully terrible, a cascade of false signals that propagated through the hive mind like a chain reaction, introducing noise, confusion, contradictory information, just enough to make thinking together feel like trying to have a conversation at a rock concert, while someone played air raid sirens directly into your brain. She'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. The collective had obligingly gathered their entire military force in one convenient location, connected through their unified consciousness like the universe's most vulnerable network. When she released the virus into the command carrier systems, it spread through the collective's neural network in seconds. 300 ships, 40 million connected minds, all suddenly experiencing the sensation of their thoughts being scrambled like eggs. The armadas stopped firing, not because they wanted to, but because coordinating 300 warships, while your brain felt like it was being run through a blender, was slightly beyond their current capabilities. She used the confusion to do what she did best, cause disproportionate amounts of chaos with minimal resource. Her fighter, now deep in the formation, began targeting ships' propulsion systems with surgical precision, not to destroy them but to send them drifting into each other like cosmic bumper cars. Within 10 minutes, the Vel'kanth armada had gone from imposing formation to tangled mess of ships, trying desperately not to collide. The collective's supreme commander, struggling to think through the neural static, managed to broadcast one coherent order: retreat, withdraw from the Sol system, abandon the invasion, just get away from this nightmare species and their nightmare soldier before she did something even worse. The armada retreated in the most disorganized withdrawal in Vel'kanth military history, ships limping away at different speeds, some still trying to untangle themselves from each other, all of them experiencing the profound desire to be literally anywhere else. She could have pursued, could have pressed the advantage, could have turned the retreat into a slaughter. Instead, she let them go, watching from her battered fighter, as the collective fled the system they'd spent 6 months trying to conquer. The virus would fade in a few hours. They'd recover eventually, but they'd remember that they'd brought overwhelming force, superior technology, and unified consciousness to a fight against one human who'd been armed with spite, creativity, and the kind of determination that came from defending your home. What the collective never learned, what the classified human files would never reveal, was that she'd never been meant to win the war alone. She was the answer to a different question. How do you buy time when you're losing? You deploy death. You make the enemy obsess over one person. You turn their overwhelming advantage into a liability by making them hunt a ghost while humanity's real counterstrike prepared in the shadows. While the Vel'kanth had been chasing her across the solar system, human engineers had been reverse engineering captured technology. Human fleets had been rebuilding in hidden shipyards. Human scientists had been developing weapons that made the neural virus look tame. She'd been the magician's left hand, the distraction that kept the audience from seeing the real trick until it was too late. The collective would learn this 3 months later when humanity's counter-offensive launched. But by then they'd lost their momentum, their confidence, and their appetite for conquering species that fought back with such creative malice. As for her, she pointed her fighter back toward Earth, toward the facility that didn't officially exist, toward the handlers who would spend years trying to help her remember how to be human again, instead of a walking apocalypse. They called her Death, and she'd been the final answer to the alien threat, not because she'd killed the most enemies, or won the most battles, but because she'd taught the collective something they'd forgotten in 3 centuries of easy conquest. Some species don't surrender. Some species send their nightmares to greet you instead. The fighter's engines burned bright against the black, a small light heading home after saving a world. Behind her, the Vel'kanth armada fled into the dark, carrying stories that would become legends. Warnings whispered across the galaxy about the species that turned one of their own into a force of nature and aimed her at their enemy. Earth's defensive stations picked up her approach, recognized the transponder code, and broadcast the message across every human channel. Death was coming home. The cheering could be heard from orbit,